Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. A new red line has been drawn in West Asia. Iran has launched a direct attack on Israel. For decades, the two countries have been engaging in a shadow war. They have been attacking each other's assets for decades. But Israel would never claim responsibility, and Iran would be firing from the shoulders of its proxies, much like what's been happening since the October 7 attacks. Lebanon's Hezbollah has been firing rockets at Israel. Yemen's Houthis have been attacking ships linked to Iran or its Western allies. Iran-backed groups in Iraq have been targeting Israel's ally, the US's base in Jordan. It's always been a proxy shadow war, one that exploded over the weekend. Never before has a missile been fired into Israel from Iranian territory. That changed this weekend. Iran attacked Israel with 120 ballistic missiles, 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles. The attack lasted around 5 hours. Air raid sirens went off in 720 locations in Israel. Take a look. Iran says for now it is done, but is Israel? Is Israel looking to wave the white flag, or will the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lead a tit-for-tat attack on Iran in order to buy some more time in office? You see, Netanyahu wants to hit back. So what will Israel's response look like is the question. This is West Asia, this is where Iran is, and this is where Israel is. The shortest distance between the two countries is about 1,000 kilometers. On the route lies Iraq, Syria, and Jordan. Will Israel risk firing a missile that flies over these countries? If not, what really are Israel's options? What is the scale of damage that Israel is looking to inflict? Which places can Israel possibly target within Iran? Will it send jets to bomb Iran? But then again, will Israeli fighter planes be flying over Iraq, Jordan and Syria? Or will Israel also launch missiles? Look, if Israel's allies are to have their way, we would not need to answer any of these questions. Israel's allies, led by America, want Israel to de-escalate. But Israel's war cabinet is determined to exact a price from Iran. The words of Benny Gantz again. But how exactly? You see, Iran had the option to use its proxies. This is Iran's so-called axis of resistance. Iran backs several Shia groups in Iraq. In Syria as well, Iran backs armed groups. In Lebanon, you have the Hezbollah. It is trained, funded, and armed by Iran. In Gaza, you have Hamas, also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Iran backs them both. In Yemen, you have the Houthis. The IDF claims that over the weekend, 350 rockets were fired from Iran, Iraq, Yemen, also by the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel does not have such a network of proxies, no groups it can shoulder the attack on. What about allies? The US has already refused to be part of the plan. Reports say US President Joe Biden has told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the US will not be supporting any Israeli counterattack. Also, it will not be participating in any offensive operations against Iran. Netanyahu apparently said that he got the message loud and clear. So Israel is left with limited options. It will have to be a direct confrontation, one solely carried out by Israel. Will it also be Israel's first own attack on Iran? The first attack on Iran that it actually claims. You see, by no means will this attack be a first for Israel. The country is accused of conducting numerous attacks on Iran. In fact, there have been drone strikes, assassinations, kidnappings, cyber attacks. But here's the thing, Israel never claimed any of it. In the year 2022, hundreds of drones were reportedly destroyed at a base near Kermanshah in western Iran. The base was Iran's primary facility for manufacturing and storing military drones. It was struck by quadcopter drones on the 14th of February 2022. The fingers pointed at Israel, but Israeli leadership did not say a word. In April that year, Haaretz ran this story. In May, an IRGC colonel was shot 5 times outside his home in Tehran. Members of Iran's Supreme National Security Council pointed the finger at Israel. In May and June of 2022, 2 Iranian scientists died. Poison was found in their food. Some reports initially claimed that one of the scientists, Ayub Entezari, was working on missiles and airplane turbines for a military research center in Yazd. That story was later changed, made less controversial. Reports said the scientists worked for a civilian industrial company. Either way, the fingers were pointing at Israel. In January 2023, suicide drones struck an Iranian military facility in Isfahan. This facility was reportedly producing advanced weapons. US media reported that Mossad was behind the attack. All of this happened in less than a year. And Israel never claimed responsibility for any of it, just like it has not yet claimed responsibility for the attack in Damascus. The attack, in fact, will Israel's counterattack be different is the question. Also, will it be a limited attack? It's hard to say that. Some experts, however, believe that Israel may choose a limited attack for the time being and launch a bigger attack in a year or so. At this point, it's anybody's guess because the final decision lies with the war cabinet. Will Netanyahu convince the other 2 men to hit in the heart of Iran? And if so, then where? What will be Israel's target? In the lead up to Sunday's attacks, reports said that Israeli retaliation would involve targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. And where are these nuclear facilities? In Zagan, Bafq, Ardakan, Esfahan, Natanz, Fordo, Arak, Bushehr, and Sanjarian. And these are just some of the places. Most of these nuclear facilities are in deserted areas, meaning an attack here will limit civilian casualties. That actually helps Israel. It gets a symbolic point without killing innocents. Something it must keep in mind, given that Israeli Defense Forces' record of civilian casualty in Gaza has been attracting a lot of criticism. What's more, Israel actually has the weapons for carrying out such precision strikes. Ironically enough, this capability was on display in Damascus. The Iranian embassy there is not located in an isolated part of Damascus. You have the embassy of Canada right next door. There are multiple banks around, also mosques, universities. Israel conducted a precision strike. It hit the Iranian consulate building. Will it also conduct a precision strike in Iran? More like a face saver, a tit-for-tat, just for the sake of it. US media claims that Israel has told the US that it is not, quote unquote, looking for a significant escalation with Iran. It is looking to protect itself, defend itself. But can you trust Netanyahu with not crossing the red line is again the immediate question. You see, a wider war helps Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister is looking at some really low popularity ratings. He built a career on the promise of security, only to find himself in office when Israel was faced with its biggest attack in history on the 7th of October 2023. What did Netanyahu do? He sent troops into Gaza. He pledged to obliterate Hamas. 6 months on, Hamas is nowhere close to being dismantled. What's more, Hamas is holding Israeli hostages, and Israel finds itself with a genocide case in the International Criminal Court. At home, protests are growing against his handling of the Gaza war. Israelis want him to step down. Netanyahu is also losing international allies. The US appears to have lost patience. Once the war in Gaza ends, Netanyahu would have to face accountability. But as long as the war continues to rage, continues to escalate, Netanyahu is more or less insulated. On the 1st of April, Israel went ahead and struck Iranian consulate in Damascus without informing the US. Netanyahu is a seasoned leader. He knew such an attack will risk a lot. It will risk a regional escalation. He knew there would be consequences. He also knew that the attack on the consulate could possibly trigger the wider war. That did not stop the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. So what is the guarantee that Netanyahu will not risk a wider war? But can Israel really afford such a war? Can it afford to fight Iran? The war in Gaza has been on for over 6 months. Iran has a standing army of at least 580,000 troops. You also have 200,000 trained reserve personnel. Either way, a response, limited or otherwise, is bound to escalate the situation. On Sunday, Iran warned of a much bigger assault on Israel should Netanyahu respond. Let me just read out what the commander of the IRGC, Hossein Salami, told the Iranian state TV. We have decided to create a new equation, which is that if from now on the Zionist regime attacks our interests, assets, personalities and citizens anywhere and at any point, we will retaliate against them. The Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces, Sardar Bagheri, has already declared, and I'm quoting, if the Zionist regime responds, our next operation will be much bigger. We have already discussed a possible response and what it could look like. Let's just dig deeper into what happened on Sunday, what unfolded. Like I just told you, Iran launched drones and missiles directed at Israel. And you know what Israel said? 99% of these were intercepted. 99%. That's the success rate that Israel is patting itself on the back for. Basically, according to Israel, its report card on the Iran attack is looking great. What about Iran? Well, Iran has rated its performance as one that exceeded expectations. It says that the success was more than expected. So if both sides were successful, who won? Who lost? Whose success is it anyway? And what happens when both sides claim success? Well, a war of narratives breaks out. And the tricky part about a war of narratives is that both sides claim victory. Like any other war, both sides want to win it. And why not, after all? In this case as well, there are claims of victory from both sides. Let's break them down for you. More than 200 missiles and drones were sent directly towards Israel. The operation was called True Promise. And with the attack, Iran stuck to its promise of retaliation and delivered. You must have heard about the Nevatim air base by now. Iranian reports claiming that Israel's Nevatim air base and a military installation on Mount Hermon were the primary targets of its strike. And there are contradictory reports again over the impact on the air base. There are claims and counterclaims. Israeli officials are calling the Iranian attack as a quote-unquote failed retaliatory response. Iran, however, claiming it was successful in fulfilling its mission's objectives. But the very fact that Iran managed to tear through Israel and America's defense and managed what it did is in itself a reason for Iran to claim success and celebrate. Also with this attack, the Iranians who were angry over the attack on the consulate in Damascus got the retaliation they wanted and are satisfied. What was the actual damage to Israel targets? In one word, minimal. But that's just one way to look at it. For example, according to John Bolton, who was the national security advisor under President Donald Trump, the Iranian strikes represented a massive failure of Israeli and American deterrence. He was speaking to CNN. Now, obviously, Israel and the US would not agree with that assessment. But there's also the fact that this attack has caused widespread international alarm. Was Israel alarmed though? Nope, it was prepared. Remember, US intel had warned that Iran would attack within 24 to 48 hours, and it did. And when the drones and missiles were fired, Israel knew. It said they were hours away. There's also the fact that this escalation in tensions gives Netanyahu an opportunity to hope that some pressure is off him vis-a-vis the Gaza hostage crisis, at least for now. But we will get to the latest on the hostage crisis and where this escalation in tensions leaves that crisis in a bit with updates from on the ground. But going back to talking about how this works out well for Israel, Netanyahu may have also reunified Israelis once again in the face of danger, or so he portrays or claims to portray. And this is something that might help keep him in power. The US is also calling it a successful mission for Israel. In fact, the White House spokesperson, John Kirby, praised what he called the extraordinary success of Israel's defense against the massive drone and missile attack unleashed by Iran. So back to that question, whose success is it anyway? Well, for now, success would lie in the situation not escalating. Success would mean avoiding a war, because the world cannot afford another one. Will Israel retaliate? The hope is it will not. Allies are urging it to exercise restraint. So will things heat up and turn into a dangerous escalation in the region? One man holds the key to that answer, and that's Benjamin Netanyahu. Will he pay heed to the calls for restraint?
غمرتوني بمشاعركم الصادقة. والقرآن دستورنا لا غير الله ما نركع.
And at this point, countries are scrambling to avert a regional conflagration amid concerns that the fallout from the Iran-Israel tensions could destabilize countries caught in the crossfire. One such country is Jordan. It borders Syria and Iraq in the north. Israel is also right next door. So is the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Saudi Arabia is at its southeast border. And as you can see from the map, Jordan finds itself in a unique position with an array of security concerns. You see, Jordan has often been called the island of stability in a sea of chaos. It is a key strategic partner for the United Nations. It welcomes refugees with open arms, even when other countries have hit their limit. It works with other countries in ensuring regional stability. Most importantly, it is a major regional ally of the US. American troops are based there. They carry out extensive exercises with the Jordanian army throughout the year. And due to its geographic location, Jordan always finds itself caught in the precarious position amid regional tensions. Experts are worried that Iran-backed proxies that are operating out of Jordan's neighboring countries could seriously threaten the country's stability. They say there is an increased risk of radicalized individuals and groups operating within Jordan's borders to get inspired by the violence and seek to carry out attacks against both Jordanian and American interests. Since the Gaza war started 6 months ago, over 160 attacks on American troops have been reported in Syria and Iraq, both countries neighboring Jordan. These groups, like the Iraq-based Al-Hashid al-Shabi, have reportedly also been involved in smuggling weapons and drugs, along with other illicit activities across the border. The influx of arms and drugs not only threatening to destabilize Jordan, they also pose a direct threat to regional security. And then in January this year, 3 US Army soldiers were killed, more than 30 service members were injured when Iran-backed groups launched an overnight drone attack from Iraq into Jordan. It was the first time that US troops were killed by enemy fire in West Asia since the beginning of the Gaza war. The attack served as a sobering example of the very real and immediate threat posed by these non-state actors. But Jordan is facing challenges within its borders as well. Recently, the overall perception of stability in Jordan has also been somewhat shaken. Its economy is struggling. There is high youth unemployment. And then there are repressive freedom of expression laws. New public opinion insights showing that disagreement over the Gaza war could also pose challenges for Jordan. According to surveys, in fact, Arabs are split on Jordan's response to the war, but are in a near consensus in opposing Jordan's recognition of Israel. Notably, a majority of the people also view the US as the biggest threat to peace and stability within the region, followed by Israel. What's more, the country faces significant challenges from the ongoing Syrian crisis, the deadlock in the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the rise of radicalism in West Asia as a result of economic and political factors. Long story short, there is a lot at stake here for Jordan. The country is facing challenges that could be worsened by any spillover from the Israel-Hamas war, consistently finding itself caught between regional threats, coupled with the socio-economic pressures it faces within. Jordan's leadership has been vocal in calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Still, when Iran launched those drones and missiles at Israel, the Jordanian Air Force stepped in to help Israel. And in the aftermath, Jordan opened up its airspace to Israeli and American planes. They also apparently shot down drones that violated its own airspace. And this was a surprising move from Jordan. Why, you ask? Because number one, Jordan has been highly critical of Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Number two, 1 in 5 people in Jordan are of Palestinian descent, including the country's own queen. Number three, over the past few weeks, there have been increasingly aggressive protests in Jordan against Israel. So when Jordan came to Israel's rescue, the world was surprised. Now, you may be wondering why Jordan appeared to help Israel, and the answer is simple: to protect itself. It faces a tough balancing act. On one hand, Jordan has its stand on the Gaza war. On the other hand, it has its strategic friendship with the US. The Jordanian leadership has to find a way to balance all of these competing interests in order to defend and protect itself from the regional configuration. Jordan has admitted this, in fact. It was quick to say that in helping Israel, it was actually defending itself. It also wants to show the US that it is a good partner. After all, the country is a beneficiary of significant military and economic assistance from America. So while Jordan's response was a surprise, experts say it is not a fundamental shift in their stand. It is deeply rooted more in the country's necessities rather than in a diplomatic stance. But what about the Israeli hostages still in Gaza? Amid the escalating tensions between Israel and Iran, Hamas has proposed a new ceasefire deal with Israel. After rejecting last week's US-mediated truce deal, Hamas has demanded permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Handing its new proposal to mediators in Egypt and Qatar, Hamas has said that any agreement must end Israel's war in Gaza. Here's what they propose: a 3-phase process. The first phase would require Israel to end the war. No hostages would be freed in those first 6 weeks. They would be freed over the second and third phases, with each phase lasting 6 weeks. In exchange, Israel will have to free Palestinians who are in prison. This is what Hamas wants for peace to return, and their demands far more than those put forward by the US-coordinated mediators last week. And it does not even end there. Hamas has demanded that in the initial phase of this potential truce deal, it would see displaced Palestinians return unimpeded to northern Gaza. It would require Israeli soldiers, the IDF, to also withdraw from all urban centers in Gaza. So what happens to the Israeli hostages is the question that remains. Does Hamas have all the Israeli hostages? Because until last week, Hamas told the truce mediators that it is currently not able to identify and locate them. And if that's true, where are they? Hamas claims that it would use the initial 6-week phase of this potential truce deal to locate all the hostages and ascertain their condition. They are believed to be still holding 129 of the 253 hostages that were abducted on the 7th of October. There are doubts about how many of the remaining hostages are even alive. And under its new proposal, Hamas would release elderly and sick hostages. Women and female soldiers would be released in the second phase. Meanwhile, Hamas is demanding the release of 30 Palestinian security prisoners for each civilian Israeli hostage released. This is a 10-fold increase from the 3 security prisoners who were freed from each civilian hostage in the last deal in November 2023. Many of the demands laid out by Hamas in its previous proposals have been rejected by Israel as non-starters. For Israel, a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the entire Gaza Strip is not on the cards. Israel has said, in fact, it intends to resume the war once any hostage deal is carried out. Remember, Israel's 2 prime war goals are declared. Number 1, securing the freedom of all hostages. Number 2, destroying Hamas's military and governance capabilities in Gaza. Will Hamas's new proposal put the ceasefire talks in more jeopardy? We will have to wait and watch. And joining me at this point on the broadcast to get us the latest from on the ground is our correspondent Jody Cohen. She was in Tel Aviv all of today talking to the families of the hostages. Jody, thanks very much for being here. Where do you think these rising tensions really leave the hostage crisis?
Hi, Molly. So if you mean in terms of rising tensions, the hostage negotiations, Hamas has rejected the latest proposal for a temporary ceasefire and return of 40 of the 133 hostages. Hamas, as you said, they've reiterated for the 3rd time, perhaps, some of their initial demands, which Israel has called delusional. But negotiations at this stage are expected to continue. We haven't heard otherwise. But if you mean by rising tensions, Iran's attack on Saturday night, in which it fired 320 projectiles towards Israel, then the focus of the Israeli government has certainly turned to that and the question of how Israel would respond. Now, David Mencer, Israeli government spokesperson, gave a statement on Monday, and he said that Iran runs Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis and militias in Iraq, and that Iran orchestrated Hamas's 7th of October massacre of Israelis. A Saudi official has reportedly told Israeli media that the Saudis also believe that Iran was behind Hamas's attack and the taking of hostages. So this suggests potentially that Israel might see putting pressure on Iran as a way to put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages.
Right. So, Jody, is there really a plan to bring the hostages home? What more can you tell us about the efforts that are being made at this point? What is your assessment? And you were talking to those families all day. Tell us more about what they told you.
Right. So in Hostages Square, it's an opportunity for people to meet with the families or friends of some of the hostages. I've been going there over the past 6 months. I was there again today, and the feeling is very much that time is running out for the hostages who've been in Gaza for 192 days now. They were saying, most of them, that the hostages need to be the government's top priority. As far as I can see it, there are 4 strategies that the Israeli government could take to get the hostages home. There's the hostage negotiations, there's pressure on Iran, pressure on Hamas, or perhaps a rescue operation, which would be difficult with Hamas's tunnels and the battalions left in Rafah. We don't know what was discussed in Sunday's war cabinet meeting, but if you look at Mencer's statement, he said that even under attack from Iran, Israel has not lost sight of the goals, which, as you said, are to rescue the hostages and destroy Hamas. That includes, he said, targeting the last 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah. And he said this before highlighting that Hamas had rejected the latest deal proposal. The government has said repeatedly that it believes that military pressure is what will lead Hamas ultimately to agree to a reasonable deal. They said that's what happened last time. But reports in the Israeli media are suggesting perhaps that Israel might have delayed an operation in Rafah. This has been denied by the Prime Minister's Likud party, and it remains to be seen what Israel's next move will be.
Indeed. We're leaving it there for the moment. Jody, thanks very much for joining us with those updates.
Thank you.
And for now, let's just give you a quick look at what else we have lined up for you on the show tonight. What happens to the 17 Indian crew members of the ship MSC Aries that was seized by Iran near the Strait of Hormuz? The Philippines is accusing China of operating sleeper cells in the island nation. This comes after an ad on Facebook called for applications for part-time military consultants. Did China mean spies? That story is coming up in just a bit. Also on the show tonight, a Chinese company is offering its employees 10 days of sad leave. It's a story that's broken the internet, and for the right reasons. We will be getting you the details on Gravitas tonight. The escalating tensions in West Asia are resulting in ripple effects far beyond the region. As I speak, diplomats in India are in touch with diplomats in Iran to secure the release of the 17 Indian crew members who were on board the ship that was seized by the Iranian forces on Saturday. On Monday, the Foreign Ministry of Iran said that Indian government officials will be allowed to meet the 17 Indian crew members on board the Israel-linked cargo ship. The assurance from Tehran came after Indian Foreign Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar dialed his Iranian counterpart, expressing concern over the crew's conditions. In a post on the platform X, formerly Twitter, Dr. S. Jaishankar said, and I'm quoting, spoke to the Iranian minister this evening, took up the release of 17 Indian crew members of MSC Aries, discussed the current situation in the region, stressed the importance of avoiding escalation, exercising restraint, and returning to diplomacy. And following the talks with the Indian minister, Iran's minister saying that they are following up on the details related to the ship. He assured that the representatives of the Indian government will soon be allowed to meet with the crew. Iran also, in fact, called for India's continued role through international institutions, including the UN Security Council, to stop the war in Gaza, which it said is the root of the current crises in the region. The ship with the Indians on board was seized on Saturday. Video shared by news agency Reuters showed members of the Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps rappelling down from what looks like a Soviet-era helicopter onto the Portuguese-flagged cargo ship. Both the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the Iranian-backed Yemeni group, the Houthis, have used this type of helicopter before to raid the ships transiting the Red Sea.
Hey, things up, don't come out. Hey, things up.
The name of this particular ship is MSC Aries, and the IRGC seized it near the Strait of Hormuz. According to state-run IRNA news agency, it was taken into Iranian territorial waters. Iran's seizure of the ship followed a suspected Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Syria's Damascus. The suspected Israeli attack had killed 12 people, including a top Iranian general. Iran, remember, had vowed to avenge the strike, and it did that on Saturday by launching hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel. The ship is associated with London-based Zodiac Maritime. It is, in fact, part of Israeli billionaire Eyal Ophir's Zodiac Group. Geneva-based MSC has acknowledged the seizure, saying that a total of 25 crew members were on board the vessel. 17 of them are Indians. The seizure also comes after the naval head of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, Alireza Tangsiri, warned last week of closing the Strait of Hormuz if it deemed necessary. According to Indian media reports, officials in New Delhi are in touch with Tehran for the security, welfare and early release of the Indians. Recently, New Delhi had even issued a travel advisory asking Indians to not travel, remember, to Iran and Israel due to the prevailing situation in the region. Is China running sleeper cells in the Philippines? What makes me ask that question? An ad posted on Facebook. It had called for part-time military consultants from the Philippines. And the Philippines believes the ad is linked to a covert Chinese organization. And this has raised alarm. The armed forces of the Philippines are considering this to be a national security concern. It has announced an investigation into the matter now. Our next report getting you the complete story.
Is China openly hiring spies in the Philippines? Is Beijing operating covert sleeper cells? The armed forces of the Philippines believe so. In the latest, an online advertisement posted on Facebook has sparked a row. The ad had called for part-time military consultants from the Philippines. So, who was eligible to apply? Anyone with at least a year of experience working within the armed forces or government departments in the Philippines. What were the applicants expected to do? Write a weekly report on military subjects of topical interest. But the Philippines claims it is just a farce. According to military intelligence reports, the recruiter was looking for Filipinos with military backgrounds to conduct espionage activities in West Philippine Sea. They're also trying to plant operatives in sleeper cells throughout the country. Meanwhile, Philippine Military Chief General Romeo Brawner has also said that military officers are being approached to help China's territorial claims in the South China Sea. The advertisement has now been taken down. In fact, the entire recruitment site has now been deactivated. The Filipino military and other government agencies are tracking those behind the Facebook account. They are also checking for any leaked sensitive information. The Armed Forces of the Philippines has called this a national security concern. It has launched an investigation into the matter. The Philippines suspects that the recruitment ad was posted by a Chinese organization. These claims are yet to be verified. China, meanwhile, has denied any wrongdoing. It has dismissed the Filipino claims as malicious speculation and fabrication. The sleeper cell allegations, however, have only intensified, especially after a Philippine senator questioned the Philippine Retirement Authority. You see, the state-owned corporation issues special resident retiree visas to Chinese nationals of soldiers' age. According to government data, some 78,000 foreign retirees hold special resident visas in the Philippines. Chinese nationals account for 30,000 of them. This only adds to the Philippines' concerns over Chinese espionage. Who knows what these Chinese nationals are actually doing on Filipino soil? Especially at a time when tensions are running high between the two nations in the South China Sea. Filipino and Chinese vessels have had repeated confrontations close to Second Thomas Shoal. Just last week, the Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. held a trilateral meeting with US President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The three denounced China's dangerous and aggressive behavior of its absurd claims on most of the South China Sea. Later this month, the US and the Philippines will conduct its annual Balikatan joint military exercises involving some 11,000 American troops and 5,000 Filipino soldiers in the region. How is the dragon going to react to all of this? Needless to say, the tensions are only expected to increase.
On that note, we're taking a very short break, but do not go anywhere. We'll be right back.
India's Global Voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.